verses 31 through 35. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little while longer. You will look for me. As I said to the Jews, now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Also you should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So today we continue in the time of Jesus' resurrection. And again we reflect on an earlier time in Jesus' story, a time in the book of John. A time when Jesus instructs his disciples and gives them his new commandment. As mentioned, this was happening just after the Lord's Supper, or after the Last Supper, just after Jesus was washing their feet. Gives them a new commandment. Well, this new commandment isn't actually new in itself. All right, we've got the 10 Commandments, and it's not one of those, okay? But it is one of the 613 commandments. One of the mitzvot, which means commandment, law, obligation. It is one of those 613. It's one that is ancient, it's familiar, it's well known, yet somehow it's brand new. Jesus presents this new commandment to his disciples. And he says, love one another. Now, it may throw us off a little bit because this commandment that Jesus gives, just a new commandment. He says, love one another. It's not what we're used to hearing in the other Gospels. Love God with all your strength, heart, and might. And then love your neighbor as yourself. He kind of switches it up a little bit here in the book of John. He just says, love one another, as if that was the part of those two greatest commandments that we don't do so well. That's the one that kind of holds us back. Now, this being very ancient, we've had a long time to get a grasp on this. It comes from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, where it says, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." This mitzvot, this commandment, this law, this obligation is not to be taken for granted. It is a critical commandment. And notice the context that it's set in, too. It's set in the context of not taking vengeance and not holding a grudge. So it's kind of just jumps right in there in a very difficult context. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do that instead of having vengeance, holding a grudge. So, imagine a time when you wanted revenge. Imagine a time when you held a grudge. Perhaps this is right now, if you're wanting revenge even at this time, holding a grudge even right now. I think many of us would like some revenge after the bombing in Boston, or some other horrific things that go on in the world. Of course we do. We're people. And then in that context of wanting revenge and holding a grudge, this is when we hear God say, love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Love one another. You could think of it as saying, face the person that you love the least in the entire world and love that person. Well, likewise, when Jesus said it, it was also in the middle of a difficult context. As mentioned, it was coming right after the Lord's Supper. And remember what's going on around the time of the Lord's Supper. This is just after it's brought out that Jesus is being betrayed by Judas. And this is just before we go into the time of Peter denying Jesus in the time of trial. It's set right in the middle of some very serious conflict, very serious issues. Living into this commandment is a new challenge every day to love one another. It's always a new challenge, no matter how ancient it is. I mean, think of the implications when you're told in this difficult situation, the difficult context, to love one another. What good will it do? What if they don't love me back? They don't deserve it. It's too hard to face that person with love after what they've done. I can't do it. I mean, Lord knows this goes through my mind. When I hear this commandment, there's more than one person who pops into my mind and causes me to grit my teeth and just growl a little bit. I have to think about loving one another. What about that guy who robbed me during seminary? Seminary of all times and places. Robbed my apartment on campus at seminary. And this was a guy that I just happened to meet randomly, needed some help. I let him stay in my place. Now, granted, I can't say I completely trusted him. I didn't let him be there while I wasn't there. But let him stay there. I was looking for low-income housing for him, getting him the bus schedule so he could ride the bus and get to his job. And sure enough, he didn't want any help. He didn't even care in the slightest bit of the help I was trying to provide for him. He was just trying to mooch. So eventually I kicked him out, right? And I left town every week to serve a church over in Louisville. This was in Lexington at the time. And he knew that. And when I was out of town, he broke in my apartment, stole a bunch of my stuff, even left evidence. I knew exactly who it was. And there it was. So I'm supposed to love somebody like this guy? Well, okay, all right, back up a minute now. In the context, Jesus is talking to his disciples. So, it's okay amongst your friends, right? Love one another when you're with your friends. Maybe that'll be a little bit easier. And then I think of a friend that I had in college, and he stole my identity. Used my credit, bought some furniture, and this even happened again recently, because obviously he still has my Social Security number. And not even maybe a year ago, used it to have an apartment and have utilities that he didn't pay for, and then it comes haunting me. This guy, who was my friend in college, tried to ruin my credit twice. I'm supposed to love him? I don't want to. Okay, well, now in the context, Jesus is talking to his disciples and love one another, so maybe this is just talking about in church, right? Fellow Christians. Okay, that should be a little more doable, right? And then I think of a guy in a church I was serving one time, just kind of out of the blue, turned against me and was all smiles in my face, acting the support role, and then would talk behind my back, trying to stir up trouble. Made me very angry. Still makes me angry. I don't want to love him. To consider even loving people like these folks, it seriously challenges my faith to no end. But it's in this context that Jesus says, love one another. I can just hear him. It doesn't matter if you've been betrayed or robbed or hurt. Love one another. I was betrayed, I was denied, I was robbed, I was hurt, and I was killed. But I love you. Love one another. It doesn't matter if you disagree, if you don't like each other, if you're getting on each other's nerves. You get on my nerves, but I love you. Love one another. I know who you are. I know what's in your heart. I know your vengeance, your grudges, your betrayals, your denials, your pain. And I tell you in the face of all of this, love one another as I love you. Not only is living God's love a new challenge to us every single day, it in turn makes all things new. Revelation describes the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven, God's kingdom coming to be. It's a world that we recognize. We know Jerusalem. We recognize this world. We've known this world. But we come to experience the world in a new way. All things are made new as we learn to love even the people we don't want to love. We gain new perspective, new wisdom, a deepening of faith, strength in our conviction, and greater capacity to forgive. Imagine the world in this way, a world where we don't have those worries of being robbed or being hurt, being betrayed or being denied. Yes, it's idealistic. Might even say unrealistic. It's beyond belief. It takes a huge leap of faith to even consider it. Yet any movement toward that world where God has a true home among us, any movement towards it begins in our hearts. Jesus wants us to understand how important love is. And that without love, all is lost. All of it, every bit of it. Paul understood, so he said, love is the fulfillment of the law. All those 613 mitzvot, love fulfills them. Those 10 commandments, love fulfills them. Likewise, Paul said from that 1 Corinthians 13 passage that was mentioned a little earlier, at the beginning of that passage, at that chapter, Paul said, if I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions and I hand over my body so that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Jesus made it painfully clear that our love for one another is the necessary result of our love for God. Dorothy Day, a brilliant writer and servant of God in so many ways, Dorothy Day put it, I really only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. I really only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. So who do you love the least? And next time you encounter that person, what will you do? In that context, hear Jesus tell you, love one another May we live our love for God. May our love for God be fulfilled, even if it's against what we want to do, even if it's against what we feel like doing, what we prefer to do. May we experience the world in a brand new way. May all things become new in our hearts and in the world around us. May we learn to love one another. Amen.